Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
This is Wayne Cowan for Attitude Magazine. Today's topic, how to support loved ones with ADHD, is a universal challenge for parents, spouses, and anyone who has a person in his or her life with diagnosed or undiagnosed ADD. You're invested in that person in every way. You want to know how you can help him or her at home, at work, and in other areas of life. You want to motivate your loved one to get treatment. You also want to know what to do if your loved one doesn't want your help. You want to deal with the resentment you might be feeling due to all the ADHD challenges that affect the whole household. You basically need a broad understanding of ADD and the most effective ways to treat it. Above all, you don't want to get discouraged. ADD is impairing, no doubt about it, but it is among the most treatable disorders in psychiatry. We are very lucky to have Russell Barkley with us today to guide us and give us answers to our questions. He knows ADD inside and out. He's conducted research on ADD since 1973 and has published nearly 300 scientific studies and book chapters on ADD and related disorders. His specialty is ADD, but it is not just a professional focus for him. Members of his own family have ADD. They include not only various extended relatives, but also a fraternal twin brother, Ron, whose ADHD indirectly cost him his life in a car crash in the summer of 2006. This webinar is actually based on Dr. Barkley's book, When an Adult You Love Has ADHD. That all being said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Barkley now. Russ, it's really great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and I'm grateful to Attitude Magazine for sponsoring this opportunity to discuss this essential topic that affects all family members who have a loved one with ADHD that they care about. And so I want to highlight some of the major points that I made in my recent book on When an Adult You Love Has ADHD, and try to go over some of the things that loved ones can do to assist their family members with recognizing the disorder, getting appropriate professional treatment, and also supporting them not just in treatment, but in life more generally. So to begin, I want to just very quickly go through how we understand ADHD, because the first step in helping a loved one is to know what you're dealing with. ADHD isn't just an attention disorder. That, I believe, trivializes the pervasive and seriousness of the cognitive or psychological difficulties with which our loved ones with ADHD are struggling. But certainly, it is represented in psychology and psychiatry and mental health professions more generally as essentially a disorder of inattentiveness, poor impulse control, and to some extent in adults, hyperactive or restless behavior. Although it is worth noting that over time, from childhood to adulthood, the hyperactivity often diminishes and is far less of a problem in adulthood than it is in childhood. But by adulthood, the inattentiveness, the distractibility, the lack of persistence, along with the difficulties controlling one's impulses, are substantial problems that permeate their life. Now, we know that these are simply the most surface or superficial, if you will, symptoms of what is essentially an underlying disorder of self-regulation or self-control. The self-control that we have is based upon a set or suite of mental abilities called the executive functions. And they're called executive functions because, like an executive that runs a large company, this is where plans are made, goals are developed, the steps to achieve the goal are formulated, and then they are put into play, as well as monitored for their success. And if they're not succeeding, then this is the part of the brain that revises those plans in a flexible way in order to overcome the obstacles in our life that we experience in pursuing our goals or tasks, and to be able to achieve those outcomes more successfully. So just like a CEO, The frontal lobe of the brain principally is where these executive functions are housed, and they help us with our goal-directed behavior. They help us organize our behavior over time to achieve our goals or the things that we've been assigned to do in an effective way, and generally to see to our long-term welfare. There are 7 different executive functions. We don't really need to spend much time on them other than to understand that they operate together in an organized fashion, very much, as some people have said, like a symphony orchestra under the conductor's direction. They are used across tasks interactively to accomplish our goals. But it would help for people to understand, at least very quickly, what these 7 are, because these are the things that your loved one is struggling with. It's not just that they can't concentrate, or that they're distracted, or that they're a little impulsive and risk-taking. Those things arise from these deficits in executive functioning. Now, the first of these that develops is self-awareness. You have to be aware of what you're doing. You have to monitor your own behavior in a situation in order to be able to, 1, stop yourself if you're doing something that's not working or inappropriate, and 2, be able to take over your more automatic behavior in the environment in order to redirect it if it's not working well or if it's turning out to be offensive to other people and it's just not very successful. So the foundation of the executive system is self-awareness and self-monitoring. Well, guess what? Your loved one has a lot of difficulty with that. They're not always aware of what they're doing, how they're acting, how they're coming across to you and to others in their interactions. That also creates a problem for them because they're not as likely to report that they're having trouble in their life as much as the rest of us see in their life. So this reduced self-awareness often leads them to think that they're functioning better than they are. And that makes it difficult to have a conversation with them about what's wrong and about getting help, because a lot of the time they either think there's nothing wrong or that it's not as bad as you're making out to be, or that they can simply pull up their bootstraps and handle it on their own using their own self-control, or more likely that it's your fault, not theirs. If people would just get off their back and leave them alone, life would be great. And so it often takes a while, usually into their late 20s to early 30s, before they wise up and smell the coffee, if you will, and begin to realize that the common denominator throughout their lifetime of struggles is them, not the other people around them. But that can take time. So self-awareness is a problem. The second problem, as we already said, is inhibition. They don't control their impulses very well. They act too quickly without thinking. They opt for the immediate reward over the delayed, better and healthier rewards. And that leads them to be very risk-taking and disinhibited people. The third is working memory. They can't hold in mind information about what they're supposed to be doing. So we often say that they're forgetful in their daily life. But what they're forgetting, by the way, is not facts. It's not knowledge. It's not history. What they're forgetting is what they're supposed to be doing. Working memory is putting memory to work. It's using our active, conscious memory to guide our behavior over time. And for you older people who may be like me, it's what you start to lose when you get past 55 or so. You don't lose your memory, you lose your working memory. You forget why you went into a room, why you went to the mailbox, what someone told you to do, what you agreed to do. You're forgetting what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what the adult with ADHD is struggling with. So it makes it very hard for them to follow through on their work, on assignments, on their promises, on their own goals and commitments, because they often can't remember it when it comes time to get it done. Other things get in the way, life gets distracting, and they're off chasing various irrelevant paths and tangents in their life. But the bottom line is they don't get done what they're supposed to do. And a lot of that has to do with this holding mental information in mind. Now, what many people don't realize is that the working memory part of our brain gives us our sense of time, and especially our ability to use our sense of time to manage ourselves over time. It's the timing part of the brain. So guess what people with ADHD have trouble with? Time management. And it helps us to explain why ADHD people have been called time blind. Because they can't deal with this part of life. This idea that you have so much time to get something done, that you have to be to work at this hour, that you have to plan how long it takes to drive across town to get to work or to go on a date or to pick up somebody or to make an appointment with a doctor. All of this involves planning with a sense of time. And they don't do this very well, if at all. They're kind of adrift in the ocean of time without a rudder. And so guess what? They're late for everything. They're never prepared for what they're supposed to be doing. When deadlines arrive, it catches them off guard, and they have little prepared when the deadline gets there. And then they're in a crisis, and they're scrambling around trying to get it all done at the last minute, which, of course, usually doesn't work very well, if at all. But the timing of life is devastating for them. And of course, the older you get, the more important time becomes in life. So this in particular is a very serious deficit in the disorder, but it helps us as loved ones of adults with ADHD to understand their predicament. Why are they always late? Why don't they have their materials ready? Why are they so disorganized? Why is their home and their car and everything else just a jumbled mess? And why can't they seem to get it done on time? They're reliably late for everything, including their clinical appointments, by the way. So, and now we know why. They can't help it. It's part of the executive brain, and the executive brain isn't working well. And guess what? They're going to be having trouble with time. Now, another part of ADHD that's in the executive system isn't talked about very much, but it's just as central to ADHD as the others, and that's emotional self-control. They show their emotions as much as they show their impulsive behavior and responses. So when they get upset, when they're frustrated, when they're impatient, or even when they're happy or silly or just excited, they show their emotions a lot more than other people. They're not timid about it. Their emotions come up very quickly and they react on the spur of the moment. Now, the emotions they have aren't irrational or psychotic or anything like a mood disorder. They're rational, but they're impulsive. They're coming out too quickly, too hastily, unmoderated, too strongly for the situation. In other words, they're not showing emotional maturity. They're acting like a younger person would act in that situation. And that can cost them in their social relationships and in their job and in their marriages, because they're reacting very quickly when other people would have suppressed that initial reaction, thought about it a little bit more, realized it's not appropriate, moderated it or downregulated it, or maybe even just substituted an alternative means of getting their point across. But of course, being impulsive, they don't do that. And that's going to cost them in their, as I said, in their jobs and in their marriages especially. Now, another area that people don't talk much about is self-motivation. When you put people, adults with ADHD, in situations that are boring, they have a lot of scut work they have to get done, whether it's paperwork at work or whether it's chores at home, whether it's paying bills on time. It's not fun. 80% of life is not fun. But when you put them in situations that aren't rewarding, those situations demand that we be able to motivate ourselves, talk ourselves into it, think about the consequences, and understand the seriousness of what we need to get done, and pick ourselves up, as I said, by our bootstraps and get it done. We're able to give ourselves that locker room pep talk before we start the boring work in order to talk to ourselves and motivate ourselves and get ourselves through the scut work. And of course, they can't do that. So when you put them in a situation where tedious stuff has to get done that's not fun, they're not going to get it done. They'll start it. They'll get off task. Anything that's more fun to do gets in the way. If they're on, playing video games or surfing the internet, they go back to it again. They always have an excuse. They procrastinate. But at the end of the day, the things that they should have gotten done, particularly the boring things, didn't get done. And, a lot of these boring things are serious things. If you don't do them, there will be long-term consequences for not paying your bills, not getting your work done in your workplace, not doing your household chores as you promised your partner you would do. And it will take a toll on other people. They get fed up with having to pick up the pieces and help you get this stuff done because you have once again gone off to do what was more entertaining and interesting to do. So there's a problem there, and that's something we're going to have to deal with. How do you motivate people to work when there's no intrinsic motivation in the situation? And then lastly, the seventh is planning and problem solving, and those speak for themselves. The ability to think ahead, plan out your solutions, follow your course. In other words, dog your ideas, as Walt Disney used to say, dog it to death and get it done. They have a lot of trouble with that. And if they encounter an obstacle, they quit. Rather than engaging in problem solving to get around the obstacle, they're as likely to give up on the goal. So if you want to understand ADHD in an adult in particular, understand that these are the 7 things that are going wrong in their life. And it's not just inattention. It's not just restlessness. They have an executive function disorder that's creating serious problems for self-regulation over time in life. Now, we know that these problems originate in the brain. They're largely biological. That's not to say that they're entirely biological, but mostly. And we know that these brain functioning difficulties arise in large part from genetic differences across people. ADHD is one of the top 3 inherited disorders in psychiatry. And again, it can be caused by other things: traumatic brain injuries, birth complications, lead poisoning, exposure to toxins, difficulties during the pregnancy that affect the child's brain development. All of these are known to increase the risk of having a person develop ADHD. But the biggest risk factor appears to be in the realm of genetics, and the genes that are problematic are the genes that build and operate the brain's executive system and the self-control that that gives us. So let's understand that our loved ones with ADHD cannot help behaving the way they do. One of the first things I encourage people to understand when they hear this part of the lecture is understand that this is a biological handicap. It is not a lifestyle choice. It is not simply something they could change in their mind over time if they wanted to. It is instead something that they are afflicted with, that they struggle against, that they suffer from. So like any other significant developmental disability or psychological disorder that is largely biological, like Down syndrome or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, those are biological problems, just like autism. And we have sympathy for people with those. We have compassion for people with developmental disabilities. We don't judge them from the moral high ground, which we might do if we saw this as just a choice or bad behavior or just laziness or just, a layabout ne'er-do-well, as we used to say back in the 50s. They're not. This is truly something that they have to deal with. And so, as Ned Hallowell, my friend, once said, understanding the neurobiology of ADHD removes it out of the realm of moral judgment and puts it squarely in the realm of medical science and, of course, the compassion that should go with our understanding of people with developmental disabilities. So this first slide, I think, is step 1 in helping a loved one. You can't help them if you don't know what's wrong. And until you understand what's wrong, what you try to do for them is often half-baked, ineffective, or maybe even contradictory and harmful. So let's understand that they're not going to get over this by changing their diet. They're not going to get over this just by practicing a little mindfulness meditation. And they're certainly not going to get over it by waking up tomorrow and making a decision to be otherwise. This is who they are. It's part of their personality. And we love them just the same. And so let's make sure that we approach them with the compassion of a developmental disability and not the judgment of someone who has difficulties. Now, on this slide, what you're seeing racking up here are the long-term consequences across childhood and adolescence in people growing up with ADHD. I don't have time to go through all of these, but you can read them for yourself, and you can see that the problems start to rack up. And while everybody with ADHD doesn't experience all of these problems, many will. And certainly they are at risk for doing so more than other people. And then, of course, going forward, when we look at the next slide on what happens in adulthood, you can see that there are additional difficulties that continue on into adulthood. Some of them started in childhood. Others are new ones, like difficulties with parenting, marital dissatisfaction, problems in intimate or sexual relationships with others, increased risks for anxiety disorders over time, not to mention the risk of suicide and depression. And then, of course, as has been discovered recently in studies in Sweden, people with ADHD who make it into late life are often lonelier and have less family supports. But let me point out one thing that was just discovered over the last few weeks, and which I reported on in my research last weekend at a scientific meeting in Washington, D.C. for professionals who specialize in ADHD. We have now documented that ADHD decreases a person's life expectancy if it is not treated in adulthood. So that alone should get us to wake up and realize the seriousness of ADHD. It's not just a mental health problem, it is a public health problem. And if we don't get treatment for our loved ones, they may be likely to experience what my fraternal twin brother Ron did, and that is get themselves into a situation that, as a result of their risk-taking, ends their life, or leads to disability, or injures or kills other people. And fortunately, in my brother's instance, the car crash he was in did not involve other people, but it did cost him his life. And so we need to keep in mind the seriousness of what we're dealing with, because if not, these people are not going to lead a long, healthy, normal, reasonable life expectancy as others. My own research shows that ADHD reduces life expectancy by at least 12 to 20 years if it is not treated through adulthood. And other evidence suggests that as well. So let's then understand on step 3. First of all, we understood the neurobiology of ADHD. It's an underlying biological disorder. Number 2, we understand the life course consequences of ADHD. Those were my last 2 slides. Number 3, now we need to understand the impact it's probably having on you as a loved one who stays in their social circle and does not abandon them or become estranged from them. And obviously, this has an effect on all of us. And I can speak for this personally because this has been the effect on me and my family as we grew up with my brother and other extended family members. The first thing is that when you get to know these people, they are very fun-loving people because of their devil-may-care, risk-taking attitude, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, every day is vacation day, and this propensity to simply want to have fun is interesting to begin with. But life is not a vacation. And as a result, at some point, vacations have to come to an end because we have work to do and responsibilities to handle, and we have to support ourselves. And that's when the rubber meets the road and these people get in trouble in their relationships. And that's where it starts to affect you, because while they're fun over the short term and they're great to have at a party, they're not so great to live with when they're not following through on their responsibilities. And so what happens is we begin to get tired of and worn out with this irresponsible, risk-taking, and unnecessarily fun-loving life that they seem to drift to. And this then leads us to become irritated, easily frustrated, and sometimes, depending on how they're acting, even ashamed of what they've done. My own twin brother abandoned his children and his wife and left them to fend for themselves. And of course, other relatives stepped into the lurch to help with the support of these children. But, there's a point where this kind of irresponsible behavior, which was extreme in my brother's case, can really weigh on you. And you start to wonder whether or not you want to stay involved with your loved one. And of course, the answer to that is you should. Absolutely. we don't abandon our mentally disabled relatives. I mean, what kind of people are we if we do that? I don't know about you, but I couldn't live with myself knowing that I could have made a difference in my brother's life, which we clearly tried to do. So let's understand then that there's a lot of anger, frustration, impatience, hostility, along with a lot of guilt and discouragement. And many times this can lead to estrangement from the individual. We just give up and walk away for a few years. We just can't take it anymore. And that's not uncommon, by the way, especially if they're not your biological relative. Let's suppose you're a spouse or a partner or just a friend of these people. What you'll find is that sometimes life is just easier if you break off the relationship. So no surprise, divorce rates are higher among people with ADHD than would be expected in the general population. And then finally, should you have the unlucky experience that we did with your loved one, it can lead to emotional devastation. You may find that your loved one winds up arrested, imprisoned, has harmed somebody impulsively or even killed them impulsively through a car accident, for instance, or some, unfortunate misbehavior that was ill considered. Or in the case of my brother, they may wind up killing themselves unintentionally. Or in the case of my nephew, my brother's son, taking their own life needlessly. So that can devastate you. That will take years to get over if that happens. So there's a lot of emotion that goes along, more so than having a typical loved one when your loved one has adult ADHD. But I want to emphasize as well that there's also the successes that come with being a part of their life, putting a safety net under them, helping them to reach their goals, maybe in non-traditional ways, and seeing that they're able to do that. There are many success stories. Just look at Michael Phelps in the Olympics, or Simone Biles, the gymnast, and others. Justin Timberlake being another one, and Adam Levine. These are highly successful people who deal with and treat and cope with their ADHD all the time. And they hold out hope for the rest of us that we can do that too for our loved ones and get that sense of accomplishment and a vicarious sense of satisfaction and success when they succeed too. So there's an upside, there's a silver lining to being involved with one of these challenging and often frustrating adults, and that is when we see them succeed. And there have been several of my relatives where we have had that success, where one of my nieces was able to get through college with help and is now working on her own and is leading a productive, effective, happy, and successful life despite having ADHD. So let's keep that in mind too. There's an upside here. And if you need reminding about that and those opportunities, just Google ADHD success stories, and you will read about hundreds of successful people who have done well despite having ADHD, not because they had ADHD. Don't assume that. I know that there's that little mantra or idea out there that ADHD creates success. I don't believe so. We've never seen that in any of our tens of thousands of research studies in the scientific literature. But what we do know is it doesn't have to interfere with it. It doesn't have to get in the way. And so let's keep that in mind. All right, so what are we going to do? The next step in helping our relatives is we need to know where they're at in what has been called the spectrum of readiness to make change in their life. This idea of being ready to change is crucial and has really improved treatment in medicine, in dealing with substance abusers, in dealing with other disorders. And it, I think, applies to helping a loved one with ADHD as well. You can't help a loved one who's in denial. The kind of thing you would do would be very different than a loved one who comes to you and says, I think I have ADHD. I'd like to make an appointment. Can you help me do that? Those are two different things, two different people. And what we do for them is going to vary. So it's not one size fits all. We're going to approach our relative, our loved one, in the same way all the time. In some cookie cutter fashion. So I want you to stop for a moment, think about the loved one that may have brought you to today's webinar, and let's think about where are they in being ready to engage the self-change process. The first stage is they're not even thinking about it. They're in denial. This is where my brother was until he was in his late 20s to early 30s. It was everybody else's fault. And if he just got away from them, life would be fine. And if you tried to talk to him about his difficulties, he would be dismissive. There's nothing wrong with me. And you may have a loved one that's like that. So you're dealing with denial. Or you're dealing with a person who says, yeah, I see that there's a couple of problems here, but I can deal with this. Don't worry about it. I don't need any help. It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. And even if it is a problem, I can deal with this. So I'll just have to, try better tomorrow. I see this in college students after they've failed their first 6 or 7 weeks of college, and they may be in jeopardy of not completing even their first semester. Sometimes we hear this a lot. I just need to go back and try harder. Well, that's not going to be enough. We call this the pre-contemplation stage because they don't even know they have a disorder. What can you do at this stage? Number one, keep material around about ADHD. Bookmark some websites. Look at Attitude, look at CHAD, look at ADD.org, look at helpforadhd.org. Keep them bookmarked. Because what we're looking for is what I call a window of opportunity to help your loved one at this stage. Anytime they come in and they say they're frustrated, I don't know why that happened at work today. I don't know why, I got that speeding ticket. I'm really upset with myself that I, blew that chance to date this young woman or this young man that I was really convinced was the right person for me. Pick your situation. You're going to hear them sometimes in front of you voice consternation at something went wrong. Why did that happen? That is your window to step in and influence them because they're open to it. And that window can close very quickly. So keep around some books. There's plenty of books like mine and Ned Hallowell's and others about ADHD. Keep these websites bookmarked. Maybe you can find Adam Levine's video on owning it that's out there as well. But whatever you do, keep the information around and then say to them during this time, this isn't the first time this has happened to you. I know it's very frustrating for you. You've come to me a few times. I wonder if you thought that maybe it might be this ADHD or this problem with self-control. Have you thought about that? And maybe we need to get more information. And by the way, I've got some things that I think you might find useful, and then share those with them. But you're looking for these little seedlings, these little bean sprouts that are about to grow in this garden of self-awareness. And you need to fertilize them. So you're going to walk around with your little watering can of information and support and encouragement and watch for the little shoots to come up out of the ground, and you're going to water them. You're going to give your loved one that information. So that's what we do when someone is in denial and not ready to change. We look for opportunities to change them with information. And I have plenty of videos on YouTube. I didn't put them there. Universities and organizations that have sponsored my talks have put them up there. But I get 5 to 10 emails a day from people based on watching those YouTubes saying what a life-changing event that was for them. So go there, find my videos, keep them bookmarked, and be ready to use them if your loved one needs help. Now, the second stage is that, okay, we've got them convinced there's a problem. They think maybe it's ADHD. They're thinking about getting help. Well, at this stage, provide more information to them. Do some research beforehand about where are the experts in the area, where are the ADHD adult clinics, and who could you get this person to if we needed to, if they say to you, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I need to get evaluated and learn more about this. This is the contemplation stage. This is where they've recognized there's a problem. They think they may need some help with it. And you can continue to educate them here about ADHD, but now's where you start to slip in some suggestions about, well, gee, I just happen to have heard about this clinic or that expert. Now, where can you find these things? Number one, check with the local CHAD organization to see if there's a chapter in your community, and if so, contact the current president and talk to them about adult ADHD resources. You can find out if there's a chapter by just going to chad.org and checking their directory. Now, if there isn't one, the next thing you can do is call the local medical school psychiatry department, or call if there's a university with a psychology department that has a graduate psychology program. They're going to have clinics, and they have been seeing adults with ADHD, I'm sure. Call them and ask them if they see them, or if they know of specialty clinics in your area for adults with ADHD. Now, if neither of those is available to you, go on the website for the State Psychiatric Association and the State Psychology Association and look for people on their registry who have identified themselves as specializing in adult ADHD. Maybe there's somebody close to you who you didn't know about. So those are 3 steps you can do to line up these appointments and doctors and experts and clinics and be ready to launch when your loved one seems ready to look for an appointment. Now, the next stage is that they're ready to go. They said they want an appointment. They want to get help. All right, now we help them with engaging the process. Maybe we drive them to the clinic. Maybe we call them that morning and remind them that they have an appointment because their sense of time is so terrible. Maybe we offer to pick up the copay so that they're not going to be canceling the appointment because they've decided they'd rather spend the $20 to $40 copay on their insurance on something else. Maybe something else got in the way. Make sure when they make the appointment that they keep the appointment. 40% of the adults who came to our clinic often cancel their appointments at the last minute or simply failed to show. Don't let them fall through that little safety net. Let's get them to the expert, to the doctor. Let's get the diagnostic process underway, because that's going to lead to the subsequent action stage, which is the treatment process itself. Now, let's assume we've gone through all of that. Great. You've got a loved one who understands ADHD, accepts it, has an appointment, has a list of treatments. Now we're engaging action. This is the self-change stage. They've got their medication prescription. Let's help them get it filled. They've been given recommendations for a cognitive behavioral therapy program. Let's get those appointments scheduled and get them over there. Maybe they need an ADHD coach to help support them through that therapy process. Are there ADHD coaches in the area? The expert you talk to should know about that. Maybe they've recommended a few people. But here is where we get them going and we help them out. Again, maybe it's calling them on the mornings of their appointment. Maybe it's helping to get them to the appointment using our own car or their vehicle to drive them there. But you get the point. This is where we keep them going and we keep them compliant with the program. Do you know that over 60% of adults with ADHD will not be compliant with their medication within 6 months or earlier of getting their medication? Isn't that terrible? I mean, these are medications that really help them. But their problem is their self-control is so erratic that they start being inconsistent with their medication. Then they don't renew the medication. They don't keep the appointment. They don't fill it at the drugstore. They don't have the money to pay for it. I mean, there's lots and lots of excuses for why they can't follow through on the treatment. Let's not let them get away with that. See if there are things we can do to help them engage and stay and adhere to that change process. And then finally, there's the maintenance stage. They're in treatment. They're doing fine. They're improving. We love seeing what we're seeing and the successes that they're having. Periodically, we need to let them know that we're supporting them. And if they need something or any help, just get in touch with us. And if they start to voice misgivings about treatment, like, I don't need this anymore, I'm doing just fine, I think I can come off my medication now, we need to be ready to discourage them from not adhering to that treatment process. Okay, so they're ready to change. What's out there? What's evidence-based treatment? First of all, getting counseling about the disorder. It's like diabetes. You need to learn about it to understand how to treat it. Your adult loved one with ADHD needs to be counseled for 1 or 2 sessions about it. They need to read some books. And if they're not going to read the books, they need to look at the videos at YouTube or find some other way to get educated about the nature of ADHD. It's more than just an attention deficit. They need to know its seriousness. They need to know that the complications of it over time can be very hazardous to their health, even shortening their life expectancy. That's what this counseling is designed to do. Get them to understand it, take it seriously, and then know what the other treatments are. Second thing we do after counseling them and educating them is, if need be, and in 80% of the cases, the need will be there, they're going to need to go on medication. We need to understand that no matter what you read in the media against these medications, it's sensationalized, it's not science-based. The evidence for these medications affecting ADHD successfully is overwhelming. These are truly the safest medications we use in psychiatry and the most effective medications for treating a condition. ADHD medications are 2 to 3 times more effective at managing ADHD than antidepressants are at handling depression, or anti-anxiety drugs are at managing anxiety. So we're lucky that we have these potent medications that are so effective at helping most people. Now, that's not to say that some people won't respond. Some people don't respond to these medications. Lucky us, we have many different kinds. We have the stimulants. We have atomoxetine, which is Strattera. We have the antihypertensive drugs. And we have different delivery systems within these different medications. We have long-acting medications, short-acting medications. So we may need to play around, try each of the medications, find out which is the best one with our loved one, and support them as they go through this sort of experimental process of trying different medications. And even maybe helping to pay the copay for the medication if that becomes the sticking point to complying with the medication trial. And if you have the financial resources, of course, to be able to do that. Now, along with medication, it helps for them to go through cognitive behavioral therapy counseling programs that are designed explicitly for adults with ADHD. These are not widespread yet throughout the United States, but many urban areas do have them. If not, you can certainly read about them in my books, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, and books by Mary Salanto and Russell Ramsey that talk about this kind of cognitive therapy for adult ADHD. But these are explicit training sessions in how to cope with your impulse control problems, your emotional impulsiveness, your low self-motivation, your difficulties with time management, your issues with self-motivation and planning and problem solving. That's explicitly what these kinds of CBT approaches that are specifically targeted to ADHD, that's what they're designed to do. So if you can find one of these programs, get them in it. Also, adult ADHD coaching, which is where we have professionals and paraprofessionals who are more trained in how to coach and support people with ADHD. These are people who are going to reach out to your loved one on a frequent basis, sometimes daily, through texting, through social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, and through phone calls. And try to help support them, see that they follow through on their goals, see that they continue to meet with their professionals, stay on their medication, keep their appointments, and follow through on whatever other change program the adult has decided to do. So it really is somebody who's out there who's going to become like a frontal lobe, like an executive for these people to keep them on track and doing what they've agreed to do. Now, that's not free. That you do have to pay for that, but it has been shown to be very effective at supporting the other interventions and these adults with ADHD. Now, routine exercise has been shown to be very effective at reducing the symptoms of ADHD on a temporary basis. This is not a cure. This is a coping device. This is a way of living with ADHD and not allowing it to be so serious or severe. So we want to encourage our loved ones to get involved in some kind of aerobic activity. And by the way, it does not matter what the sport is. It can be long-distance running. It can be simply running on a treadmill or using an elliptical trainer. It can be training for marathons. Maybe it's martial arts. Maybe it's playing pickup softball games or doing other things that involve sport. Or maybe it's just a routine that they develop at home. But it needs to be aerobic. It's not going to be yoga. It's going to have to be something that's more physically active than those more semi-passive activities. My apologies to you yoga people out there, but that's just not going to be the aerobic intervention that we need. Now, physical exercise then can help at that sort of a large-scale level. Scheduling it at least 3 to 4 times a week is going to make you a better person with less ADHD. But it also helps to think of it at the micro level of, if you have to go into a situation that's boring, that's tedious, that you know is going to tax your attention span, Like, let's say you have a meeting to do. Let's say you've got some tedious work you have to do at your desk or at home. The best thing you can do is to engage in a little brief period of physical activity or exercise, whether that's walking up and down a flight of stairs or going out and walking or even running around the building, or whether it's just taking something into the meeting with you, like a stress ball or a rubber ball or a tennis ball or something like that that you can squeeze while you're in the meeting. The person needs to stay active and moving and restless when they're in a boring situation. And that kind of micro exercise has also been shown to help them to get through these times of boredom that's difficult to concentrate, whether that's a college class or a business meeting, doesn't really matter. Now, there's some growing evidence that practicing mindfulness-based meditation, like the kind that John Kabat-Zinn has championed in the US over the last 30 years. There's plenty of books on mindfulness for adults with ADHD. Lydia Zalaska has one that is, I think, quite good. And I'm not referring here to the more religious Eastern aspects of Buddhism or Hinduism. We're talking here about the more westernized, secular, non-religious practice of just learning how to meditate as a means of coping with stress, bringing yourself into the moment and being more mindful of your own behavior. Now, this in and of itself is not going to solve their executive deficits. That would be naive to assume that. It's really good for stress management. It's really good for helping with emotion regulation, but it's and even helping with concentration. But it doesn't help with time management or self-motivation or things like that. But that's something that they can do either with a therapist or in a mindfulness group or on their own by just reading about it on the internet, looking at YouTube videos, or reading Lydia's book. And then finally, let's understand that 80% of our loved ones have another disorder along with their ADHD. The most common are the learning disabilities, such as problems with reading, spelling, handwriting, language, arithmetic, and so on. Those are going to have to be treated separately from the ADHD. Maybe they have a comorbid psychological problem. The most common is anxiety disorders, particularly as they get older. The second most common would be something like difficulties with anger management and oppositional and defiant behavior. So maybe they need some coping with anger. And then third would, of course, be depression, which about 1 in 4 adults may experience. Whatever the comorbid disorder is, we're going to have to get additional assistance for our loved one to help deal with those, because oftentimes the treatments for ADHD don't address the other coexisting disorder. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. So pay attention to that as well. So here's the array of evidence-based treatments for adult with ADHD. Now, at this point, having heard all of this, one of the things that you have to decide as a loved one is, how much help can I provide? What role do I want to play with my loved one? And I moved around a bit in trying to help my brother and in helping my other relatives who continue to survive and succeed. How do we do that? Well, step one, which is a very elementary step that doesn't take an awful lot of time, is just be the person in the family who accepts and understands them. This is the go-to person where after everybody else has turned on you, this is the person that accepts you for who you are. That doesn't mean they're going to excuse what you've done or dismiss it, but they're not going to leave you. They're not going to walk away. So it could be an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, a parent, but just somebody who accepts who you are, warts and all. We call that unconditional positive regard. So this is somebody that they can come to when they need to talk, and you're going to be a good listener. And of course, as I've already said, you're going to be ready with ADHD information to share with them if part of that listening is them opening up and expressing a concern about what's wrong and a willingness to get help. The second level, moving up a bit, is you're not only going to accept and listen, but you're going to be an active support member of the team. Here's where you're going to be the person who might drive them to the appointment, call them on the days that they have appointments to remind them of that, help them financially if necessary with the copay, and just check in with them periodically like an informal ADHD coach to try to support them as they go through this change process and keep them in treatment, keep them on their medication. Now, if you really want to get active and involved, as I have sometimes with my relatives, you can become an advocate. What does that mean? It means that maybe you go with them when they look to get support in college under the Americans with Disabilities Act using the Special Student Services Program. Maybe you work with them on trying to get Social Security benefits if their ADHD is so severe that they are one of the few that is permanently disabled by it and becomes eligible for this ongoing financial assistance. Now, most adults with ADHD don't qualify for this, but some of the more severe ones might, and it's worth looking into. Maybe we're talking about somebody who needs help in the workplace getting accommodations from their employer under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But in either way, you're going to go with them, advise them, read up on the laws and the rules and the regulations, and become a champion for your loved one at advocating on their behalf. And it may be that you're an assertive person like I am, and that this doesn't bother you, and you're not so concerned about what other people think about you, so you can step up and be the advocate. Other loved ones are more shy, more quiet, less, if you will, assertive and outgoing, and so they wouldn't want to play the advocate role. They would want to be an acceptor, listener, and support team member. And then, of course, there might be some of you who do what I did with my brother and become a financial benefactor. There are times in their life where they need a little financial help, and maybe you're the person to go to. Now, I'm not talking about giving them cash. Please do not do that. That will wind up going to something that is non-constructive. I'm talking about paying for the constructive or effective intervention. For instance, if your loved one needs dental work, because these adults with ADHD often have very poor dental hygiene, wind up having more fillings, wind up having more abscesses, letting things go to the point where they're going to need a major dental intervention. And with my loved ones, what I did is to help pay for that. So we wanted to be sure, because it can kill you if you get a tooth abscess and it becomes sepsis, and it can wind up getting into the bloodstream and so on. So that's a constructive way. They're not going to divert the income over to drug use or entertainment or free vacations. It's going to what you want it to. Maybe they want to enroll in a community college, as one of my relatives did, or in a major university. So we help them get the financial support that they need. And if necessary, maybe we help with the books, the special fees, or even helping with the tuition if it's reasonable for us to do that within our own financial means. That's what I mean by being a benefactor. You help pay for the constructive things they're talking about doing, if that's something you can afford to do. And if that is the difference between whether they're going to be able to do it or not. This is what Michael Phelps' mother did for him. This is what Adam Levine's family did for him. This is what Richard Branson, the billionaire head of Virgin Airlines, this is what his parents did. They second mortgaged their house to help him out when he was struggling as a young adult. So I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying that, there are levels of being a benefactor. Think about it. And then finally, when all else fails, be a safety net. Don't let your loved one become homeless, as at one point my brother was, living on a beach in Florida in his car after he had been kicked out of the house by his then current wife. We don't want that, because then their life is at stake. And nobody wants a homeless loved one with adult ADHD when they could have made a difference helping them find a place to live and get food and get the necessary shelter and medical care that keeps them from falling through the cracks and maybe not surviving as a result of that. So think about what role you want to play and step up to those roles and see what you can do. So I see, as we're approaching the end of our time here, I want to leave at least a few minutes for a couple of questions. I know that there are probably many. But please, let's, Wayne, I'm not sure if you and Janice are going to moderate this, but if there's something coming through, pick a few and I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, I want to do one practical and one a little more general. A lot of people are interested in coaches. They're saying, tell me where they might find trained ADHD coaches. Is there an organization or two?
You can Google this, and some of the organizations will come up. Just keep in mind that when this happens, when you go to the internet, you have to check for certification for credentials. Because right now, ADHD coaching is not a licensed profession within a state where you can be guaranteed that the person has met the credentials needed for licensing. Ultimately, we hope that that will happen. In the meantime, coaching organizations have developed the criteria for being a coach and the credentials and coursework you need to do that. You want to make sure whoever you call isn't just some financial planner who's moonlighting as an ADHD coach or life coach on the side. We want well-informed people. So check with these associations. Ask the person whose name you get about their credentials. Don't be afraid to do that. You're not insulting anybody when you do that. And make sure that you're dealing with someone who truly does have the wherewithal to do that. Now, you're going to see some very prominent coaches out there on the internet, friends of mine like Jeff Copper at ADHD Talk Radio, or Eric Tivers, or others, Nancy Rady, although I think she's retired now. There's a ton of coaches out there. Again, check with your local CHAD chapter. Check with your local psychiatry and psychology department if you're not sure. Maybe they know some coaches as well. But that's what I would do, is make sure you screen them.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people, more than one, have mentioned that they've brought their husband or a loved one for an evaluation. A prescription is written. They get home and the spouse or partner says, "I don't believe in medication." There's a lot of that. So yes, I want you to just address that.
Okay, well, clearly, let's go back to the readiness for change. And we have seen that too, because the loved one goes along with it during the appointment to save face with the professional and you. Maybe they went along with the appointment because you coerced them into the appointment. Either you threatened something or there's something else hanging in the balance. They really weren't committed to going, but they went along just to try to appease you and get you off their back. And then to get the professional off their back, they took the prescription. But clearly, they were not at the readiness to change where they were contemplating and ready to engage the change process. So what I would say is back up. Okay, let's go back to step one. We're at the first stage. They're in denial, or they think that maybe there might be something wrong, but they don't believe the professional. And now we may have to go back and get more information to them about these life risks, the reduction in life expectancy, the difficulties they're going to have with maintaining a job or getting through school with their ADHD. In other words, everything they value in life may hinge on their getting this treatment or it won't work. Maybe you go back and remind them of all of the goals that they've set that they've never been able to achieve and how disappointed that they have been, and about how their self-esteem has been damaged as a result of not being able to do this. Well, it doesn't have to be that way if they'll just engage the change process. But I'm also going to tell you that I'm not naive. I've been through this before. Sometimes there's nothing you can do until they hit bottom. You're not going to be able to persuade them to engage that change process or stay with their medication until something more serious happens. My brother had to get kicked out of his house before he went to get help. And even then, he was very erratic over the years at getting help and giving it up and then going back in again and so on. That's just the way things go with adults with ADHD. And by the way, that's typical of other adults with psychological disorders as well. They're not the only ones who are erratic in staying with their treatment program. Again, you may have to be the person who helps to fill in those gaps with them if necessary. Otherwise, you may just have to step back and let them crash and then step in to pick them up and help encourage them to get that treatment process. I know of people who have had to be arrested or who have lost a job or who have lost their marriage, who that was the point where they hit bottom and realized that they needed to do something about this. And so we had them look at the videos on YouTube, maybe read some of the books and so on. But, until your loved one is motivated and open to change, there's not an awful lot we can do other than to be ready to share information when those windows of opportunity to influence them present themselves. It's the old joke about how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. Well, that's where we are with your loved one. And I'm telling you, if they're not ready to change, that's what we have to work on, is getting them to move along that process. And don't worry about the prescription or the therapy until they accept that they really have a disorder. That's why Adam Levine created that video called Owning It. if you don't own it, nothing a loved one can do is going to help you. So try to help them own it.
Well, that was terrific, Russ. I really appreciate that. Everyone has, I'm sure, great insights and strategies.
Well, been there, done that. Yes.
Thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise. Really, it's helpful.
You're quite welcome. I hope it helped.
Yep. Have a good day, everyone.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.